Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the massive creature below with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Karathi alpha male stood nearly 4 meters tall, its midnight black scales gleaming under the artificial lights of the research station. 6 powerful arms moved with surprising grace as it arranged what looked like toys in a careful pattern on the ground. "This shouldn't be possible," whispered Dr. Marcus Webb, Sarah's research partner. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the recording equipment. Apex predators don't behave like this. Not with alien species, not with anyone. The Karathi had arrived on the human research station 3 days ago, completely unannounced. The massive ship had simply appeared in orbit around the remote planet, where humanity had established their xenobiology research base. No communication, no warning, just a gentle landing in the designated visitor area, followed by the emergence of the most dangerous creature known to the galactic community. Sarah had studied the Karathi for years through second-hand reports and grainy surveillance footage. They were legendary throughout the galaxy as perfect killing machines, standing at the absolute top of every food chain they encountered. These beings had conquered 17 star systems through pure physical dominance. Their natural weapons included retractable claws that could slice through starship hull plating, acid sacs that could dissolve most known materials, and a hunting instinct so refined that even the Zentari warrior caste considered them too dangerous to engage. Yet here one stood, carefully arranging what appeared to be primitive dolls and geometric shapes in neat little rows. The Alpha's massive head, crowned with bone ridges that could ram through reinforced barriers, tilted with an almost childlike concentration as it positioned each item with delicate precision. "Look at those movements," Sarah murmured, making notes on her tablet. "The fine motor control is incredible. Those claws could tear through our hull like paper, but watch how gently it handles those objects." The objects themselves were puzzling. They appeared to be handmade, crafted from some kind of bioplastic that the Karathi could apparently secrete and shape. Some resembled tiny versions of various galactic species. Others were abstract geometric forms that seemed to follow mathematical principles Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "Sarah, you need to see this." Marcus had moved to the communication console, his face pale. "I've been monitoring galactic news feeds since it arrived. This isn't just any Karathi. This is Vorthak the Destroyer." Sarah's blood ran cold. Every sentient being in known space had heard of Vorthak. The creature had single-handedly dismantled the Hegemony Fleet's primary battle station. It had killed the immortal warlord of Kepler Prime in single combat. It was, by all accounts, the most dangerous individual organism currently alive in the galaxy, and it was playing with toys. "The communication requests are still coming in," Marcus continued, his voice barely steady. "Every major government, every military organization, every research institution wants to know why Vorthak came here, why it chose our tiny research outpost. The Galactic Council is threatening to quarantine the entire system if we don't provide answers within 48 hours, Sarah watched as Vorthak completed its arrangement and sat back on its powerful haunches. The creature's head turned upward, and for a moment she could swear it was looking directly at her through the observation window. The large golden eyes held an intelligence that went far beyond animal cunning. There was something almost hopeful in that gaze. "We need to make contact," Sarah said suddenly, the words surprising even her. "Are you insane?" Marcus grabbed her arm. "That thing could kill every person on this station without breaking stride. The safety protocols exist for a reason. No direct contact with Apex-class entities ever." But Sarah was already moving toward the communication panel. "Look at the behavioral patterns, Marcus. This isn't aggressive posturing. This isn't territorial marking. This is preparation. It's getting ready for something, and I think it wants our help." The communication system crackled to life as Sarah activated the external speakers. Her voice, translated through the station's universal language matrix, echoed across the landing area below. "Greetings, Vorthak. I am Dr. Sarah Chen, xenobiologist and director of this research station. We welcome you to our facility." The massive head turned fully toward the observation deck. Vorthak rose to its full height, all 6 arms spreading in what could have been either a threat display or a gesture of greeting. When it spoke, the voice was surprisingly melodious, though the underlying power was unmistakable. "Human Dr. Sarah Chen." The words came through the translation matrix, with only slight distortion. "I have traveled far to reach your kind. I come with a request that may seem strange to you, but which represents the hopes of my entire species." "What kind of request?" Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Vorthak gestured to the carefully arranged objects on the ground. "I have prepared these learning tools in the hopes that you will understand. We have heard stories of your people across the galaxy, stories that speak of a trait so rare, so precious, that we dared not believe them until now." "What trait?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The great creature's head lowered slightly, and when it spoke again, there was something unmistakably vulnerable in its tone. "Your species is said to care for young that are not your own. Not just your own offspring, but the children of other species entirely. Is this true?" Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus, whose face had gone completely white. The implications of the question were staggering. Across the galaxy, every species followed the same fundamental rule: protect your own offspring, ignore or eliminate the offspring of others. It was the most basic principle of survival, so universal that xenobiologists called it the prime directive of life. But humans were different. They adopted pets from other species. They rescued injured animals. They cared for orphaned creatures with the same dedication they showed their own children. It was such a basic part of human nature that they rarely even thought about how unusual it was. "Yes," Sarah said softly. "Yes, it's true." Vorthak's massive form seemed to tremble slightly. "Then perhaps there is hope for our young after all." The giant predator moved aside, revealing something that had been hidden behind its bulk. A smaller transport pod sat partially concealed in the shadow of the main ship. As Sarah watched in amazement, the pod opened with a soft hiss, and 3 small forms emerged into the light. The 3 small creatures that emerged from the pod were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, yet somehow heartbreakingly familiar. They were clearly young Karathi, but where adult members of the species were terrifying apex predators, these little ones moved with the uncertain, wobbling steps of toddlers learning to walk. Their scales were a soft silver gray instead of the intimidating black of their parent, and their golden eyes held the wide, curious wonder that seemed universal to all young creatures. The largest of the 3 stood perhaps half a meter tall, while the smallest was barely the size of a human infant. They clustered close to Vorthak's massive legs, occasionally reaching out with tiny claws to touch the geometric toys their parent had arranged so carefully. "By the void," Marcus whispered, unconsciously switching to the Universal Explorer's oath. "They're just babies." Sarah felt something deep in her chest tighten as she watched the little ones play. The smallest stumbled slightly and immediately looked up at Vorthak with a soft chirping sound that the translation matrix interpreted as distress. The massive predator bent down and gently nudged the tiny creature back to its feet with movements so careful they seemed almost impossible given the size difference. "Vorthak," Sarah called down through the communication system, her voice thick with emotion she didn't fully understand. "Why have you brought your children here?" The great creature's answer came slowly, as if each word carried enormous weight. "Because they are dying and I cannot save them." The simple statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles white. "What do you mean?" "They look healthy. They're moving, playing, exploring. Their bodies are strong," Vorthak agreed. "But their minds, their spirits are withering." "Tell me, Dr. Sarah Chen, what do you know of Karathi development?" Sarah activated her personal database, scrolling through the limited information humanity had gathered about the species. "Not much, I'm afraid. Most of our data comes from military encounters or long-range observations. We know you're apex predators, that you reach physical maturity around age 30 standard, that you're incredibly territorial." "All true," Vorthak interrupted, "but incomplete. What your data cannot tell you is the most crucial aspect of our development. Karathi young require challenge to develop properly, not physical challenge. Their bodies will grow strong regardless. Mental and emotional challenge." The massive alien paused, watching its children explore the toys with growing animation. In the natural cycle, young Karathi learn by observing and interacting with many different species. They study the hunting patterns of smaller predators, the social structures of prey animals, the problem-solving abilities of creatures both dangerous and harmless. This interaction shapes their developing minds, teaches them to think beyond pure aggression. Sarah began to understand, and the realization filled her with horror. "But your expansion across the galaxy, you've eliminated most of the other species in your territories. Yes. The single word carried the weight of a species' terrible mistake. In our conquest of 17 star systems, we have created empty spaces around ourselves. Our young now grow in environments devoid of the very diversity they need to develop properly. They become incomplete, intelligent enough to understand their own emptiness but unable to fill it. Marcus had joined Sarah at the railing, his expression shifting from fear to fascination. That's why the geometric toys. You're trying to provide artificial stimulation, mathematical challenges to replace the missing biological ones. A poor substitute, Vorthak admitted. Our greatest scientists have tried for 3 generations to solve this problem. We have built elaborate simulations, created artificial ecosystems, even attempted to preserve other species in captivity. Nothing works. Our young continue to develop into hollow versions of what they should become. Sarah watched the 3 small Karathi as they investigated their parents' offerings. They showed clear intelligence, even creativity in how they manipulated the objects, but there was something missing. A spark that should have been there wasn't. Then why bring them to us? She asked. We're just another species you could have conquered. Vorthak's golden eyes met hers through the observation window. Because you are the first species we have encountered that shows genuine care for young that are not your own. The first species that might be willing to help rather than flee or attack. But we don't know anything about raising Karathi children, Marcus protested. We wouldn't know where to begin. You do not need to raise them, Vorthak replied. You need only to be yourselves, to interact with them as you would interact with any young creature in need. Your species has a trait that ours has forgotten in our pursuit of dominance, compassion that extends beyond genetic loyalty. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Here was the most feared creature in the known galaxy, asking for help with something as fundamental as childcare. The irony was staggering, but so was the opportunity. What exactly are you proposing? She asked carefully. I wish to leave my young here with your people for a time, long enough for them to experience the kind of diverse, nurturing environment they need, long enough to learn that the galaxy contains wonders beyond conquest and death. And you think being around humans will provide that? Vorthak gestured toward the observation deck with one massive arm. In the 3 days I have been here, I have watched your people through the windows of your facility. I have seen researchers stop their important work to care for an injured native bird. I have watched your maintenance staff create elaborate games to entertain a small furry creature that wandered into your facility. I have observed your scientists spending hours in patient explanation when their students ask questions. The alien's voice grew softer, more wonder-filled. Most remarkably, I have seen your people show concern for my young ones even knowing what I am, what I represent. This level of cross-species empathy is beyond our understanding, but we recognize its value. Sarah looked down at the 3 small creatures, who had now discovered that they could stack the geometric shapes into towers. They were working together, the largest one supporting the structure while the middle one carefully placed each piece, and the smallest one chirping what sounded like encouragement. Despite their alien nature, despite the deadly potential locked in their developing forms, they were undeniably adorable. How long would you want to leave them here? She asked. Until they are ready for the next stage of their development. Perhaps 6 months, perhaps a year. I would remain nearby, visiting regularly, but not constantly present. They need to form bonds with beings who are not Karathi, who do not see the world through the lens of predation. Marcus was already pulling up files on his tablet. The legal implications alone would be staggering. The Galactic Council would have to approve any extended contact with a protected apex species. And the safety concerns? They are young, Vorthak said simply. Their claws are soft, their acid sacs undeveloped. They could not harm you if they tried. And they will not try. Aggression toward caretakers does not develop until much later in their life cycle. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. We'll need to discuss this with our teams, run it through proper channels. But Vorthak, personally, I think it's worth trying. But I have one condition. The massive predator tilted its head expectantly. You have to trust us completely. If we're going to care for your children, you can't hover over us ready to intervene at the first sign of something you don't understand. Human child rearing probably looks very different from Karathi methods. For the first time since arriving, Vorthak made a sound that the translation matrix couldn't quite interpret. It was somewhere between a growl and a purr, and somehow Sarah knew it was laughter. Dr. Sarah Chen, the great creature, said, "If I were not prepared to trust your species completely, I would never have come here at all." The emergency council meeting convened 6 hours later in the station's main conference room. Representatives from 12 different human colonies appeared via hologram, their faces displaying varying degrees of disbelief, terror, and fascination as Sarah presented the situation. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said Admiral Zhang, head of Colonial Defense. Her image flickered slightly, due to the long-range communication delay. "The most dangerous apex predator in known space wants us to babysit its children?" "That's an oversimplification, but essentially accurate," Sarah replied. She gestured to the display showing behavioral analysis footage of the young Karathi. "These aren't ordinary circumstances. We're looking at a species-wide developmental crisis that could reshape galactic politics." Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Xenopsychology Institute leaned forward, her expression intense. "The implications are staggering. If the Karathi are producing mentally incomplete offspring, their expansion will eventually stagnate. They might become less aggressive as a species over time, or more desperate," countered General Morrison from Strategic Command. "Desperate predators are often more dangerous than confident ones." Sarah had been preparing for this resistance. "General, with respect, we're not talking about a military threat assessment. We're talking about children, 3 specific children who need help. Children who will grow up to be apex predators," Morrison shot back. "Children who could potentially turn on their human caretakers the moment their predatory instincts develop." Marcus stepped forward, activating a new display. "Actually, our analysis suggests the opposite might be true. If Vorthak is correct about the importance of early social bonding across species lines, these young Karathi might develop into the first generation of their kind capable of genuine peaceful coexistence." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Vasquez was the first to speak. "You're talking about fundamentally altering the most aggressive species in the galaxy through early childhood intervention." "I'm talking about giving 3 children the chance to develop properly," Sarah corrected. "Any broader implications are secondary to their immediate welfare." Admiral Zhang's expression had shifted from skepticism to calculation. "What kind of support would you need? This can't be attempted with your current skeleton crew." "We'd need specialists," Sarah admitted. "Child development experts, xenobiologists, security personnel trained in nonviolent intervention, and probably a few people who are just naturally good with kids." "Regardless of species, I volunteer," announced Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the station's medical officer, who had been silent until now. "I've raised 4 children of my own, plus I've worked with over 20 different species in medical contexts. How different could it be?" Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward her colleague. "Thank you, Jen. That's exactly the kind of attitude we need." "What about the Galactic Council?" asked Dr. Vasquez. "They're not going to approve extended contact with an apex species without extensive deliberation. The Galactic Council consists primarily of species that view the Karathi as an existential threat," Sarah replied. "They might see this as an opportunity to understand and potentially pacify that threat." Admiral Zhang was already making notes. "I'm going to recommend conditional approval. 6-month trial period, with extensive monitoring and regular evaluation. If there are any signs of danger to human personnel, the experiment ends immediately." "What about public opinion?" asked Dr. Vasquez. "When word gets out that humans are caring for Karathi young, there's going to be panic across half the galaxy." Sarah had been dreading this question. "We'll have to be completely transparent about our methods and findings. Turn it into a research project with full documentation. Show the galaxy exactly what we're doing and why." The meeting continued for 2 more hours, covering everything from dietary requirements to emergency protocols. By the end, Sarah had authorization to proceed with a carefully monitored 6-month program. The resources being allocated were staggering: 3 xenospecialist teams, a full pediatric medical suite, advanced monitoring equipment, and a security detail trained specifically for nonviolent crisis intervention. When the meeting ended, Sarah found herself standing alone on the observation deck again, looking down at Vorthak and the young ones. The great predator had remained motionless for hours like a guardian statue watching over its precious charges. "It's been approved," she called down through the communication system. 6 months with regular evaluations. We'll do everything we can to give them what they need. Vorthak's massive head turned upward, and Sarah could swear she saw relief in those golden eyes. And the conditions? What restrictions will be placed upon our arrangement? You can visit, but not constantly. We need them to bond with humans, not just tolerate our presence while waiting for you to return. We'll maintain detailed records of everything, and if there are any signs of danger to our people, the program ends immediately. Acceptable, Vorthak replied without hesitation. When do we begin? Sarah checked her chronometer. The specialist teams will arrive within 72 hours. We can start with basic orientation tomorrow. But Vorthak, I need you to understand something. Yes? Human child rearing emphasizes play, exploration, and gradual learning through trial and error. We don't typically structure every moment or control every variable. Your children are going to experience a level of freedom that might seem chaotic or dangerous to you. The great creature's laugh growl rumbled across the landing area. Dr. Sarah Chen, chaos and danger are exactly what Karathi Young required to develop properly. Structure and control are what created our current crisis. Sarah smiled for the first time since the whole ordeal began. In that case, I think your children are going to love living with humans. Below on the landing pad, the smallest of the young Karathi had discovered that the geometric shapes made different sounds when tapped together in various combinations. It was systematically working through every possible pairing, its tiny head tilted in concentration as it listened to each unique tone. The other two had joined in, creating an impromptu percussion ensemble that filled the air with an alien but oddly cheerful melody. They're already making music, Sarah murmured. More to herself than to Vorthak. Music? The massive predator's voice held genuine confusion. Sarah realized that she had just encountered another fundamental difference between their species. Organized sound for pleasure rather than communication. It's something humans do when we're happy or creative or just exploring the world around us. She watched as Vorthak studied the young ones with new interest. The great creature had probably never considered that sound could serve purposes beyond threats, warnings, or basic information exchange. Will you teach them to make music? Vorthak asked. If they want to learn, Sarah replied. But the most important thing we'll teach them is that they have choices, that they can be whatever kind of Karathi they want to be. For a long moment, the most feared predator in the galaxy was silent. When it finally spoke, its voice was barely above a whisper. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. The first week was chaos. Despite all the planning and preparation, nothing could have truly prepared Sarah's team for the reality of caring for 3 young Karathi. The children, whom the humans had taken to calling Zeph Nova, and Pip based on their personality traits, proved to be simultaneously more challenging and more delightful than anyone had anticipated. Zeph, the largest and oldest at roughly 3 standard years, demonstrated an insatiable curiosity about everything in the research station. Within hours of Vorthak's departure for his promised nearby but not constant vigil, Zeph had figured out how to open doors by watching the humans, despite the fact that the controls were designed for completely different appendages. Dr. Chen, we have a situation in Lab 7, came Dr. Walsh's voice over the intercom, accompanied by what sounded like crashing equipment. Sarah rushed down the corridor to find Zeph standing in the middle of the xenobotany lab, surrounded by soil samples, plant specimens, and scattered research equipment. The young Karathi's scales had taken on a greenish tint from rolling in the alien moss samples, and it was carefully examining a flowering specimen from Kepler 442b with the intense focus of a professional researcher. Zeph, Sarah called out, not quite sure if she should be angry or impressed. What are you doing? The young creature looked up at her with those enormous golden eyes and made a series of soft chittering sounds that the translation matrix interpreted as learning. Smells different. Why flower change color when I touch? Sarah followed Zeph's gaze and realized that the Keplerian lotus, which normally maintained a steady blue hue, was indeed shifting through a spectrum of colors in response to the young Karathi's touch. In 3 years of studying that particular specimen, no human researcher had triggered that response. Dr. Chen, whispered Dr. Martinez, the xenobotanist, who had been standing frozen in the doorway. The chemical signature analysis. Zeph's natural skin secretions are causing a reaction we've never seen before. This could be groundbreaking. Sarah looked at the mess, looked at Zeph's expectant expression, and made a decision that would define their entire approach. Zeph, would you like to help Dr. Martinez with his research? The young Karathi's scales brightened to an almost silver sheen, which Sarah was learning indicated excitement. Help can touch more flower things? If you're very careful and listen to instructions, yes. But first we clean up this mess, together. What followed was Sarah's first lesson in Karathi learning patterns. Zeph didn't just clean up the scattered equipment. The young creature cataloged and organized it with a precision that made the human researchers take notice. Every item was placed not just where it belonged, but in optimal configuration for efficiency and accessibility. It's like having a tiny, scaled research assistant, Dr. Martinez marveled as Zeph carefully arranged the chemical analysis tools in perfect order. Look at that organizational system. It's better than mine. Meanwhile, Nova, the middle child, had discovered the station's recreational facilities. The young Karathi was approximately 2 standard years old and showed a fascination with puzzles and games that bordered on obsession. Chief Engineer Thompson found Nova in the game room, having somehow figured out how to activate the holographic chess set, and was now playing against the computer. Dr. Chen, you need to see this, Thompson called over the intercom. Nova just beat the computer on intermediate setting. Sarah arrived to find Nova locked in what appeared to be intense concentration. 6 small arms moving chess pieces with deliberate precision. The computer had been set to a skill level that challenged most adult humans, yet Nova was holding its own and occasionally gaining advantage. How is this possible? Sarah wondered aloud. The game requires understanding of complex strategy, pattern recognition, future planning. Maybe that's exactly what young Karathi minds are designed for, suggested Dr. Walsh, who had joined them. Vorthak did say they needed mental challenges to develop properly. What if their brains are naturally wired for this kind of complex thinking? Nova looked up at the gathered humans and made a pleased purring sound. Fun game. Think many steps ahead. Like hunting, but no one gets hurt. Sarah felt a chill of realization. Nova, when you play this game, what are you thinking about? Strategy. How each piece moves. What opponent might do next. How to protect important pieces while attacking weak spots. Nova paused, tilting its small head. Why is different for humans? No, Sarah said slowly. It's exactly the same. But Nova, this game, it's based on warfare. Military strategy. Does that bother you? The young Karathi considered this seriously. Game is pretend war. No real hurt. His way to practice thinking without causing damage seems good? Dr. Walsh exchanged meaningful glances with Sarah. Here was a creature descended from the most violent predators in the galaxy, naturally understanding the difference between strategic thinking and actual violence. Understanding, moreover, that strategic thinking could be divorced from harmful intent. The youngest, Pip, presented entirely different challenges. Barely past the equivalent of human infancy, Pip had formed an immediate and intense attachment to anything soft and warm. The little creature had claimed Dr. Walsh's spare sweater as its personal territory, and refused to be separated from it for more than a few minutes at a time. It's like having a very exotic pet, Dr. Walsh explained to Sarah as they watched Pip curl up in a nest made from soft laboratory materials. Pip follows me everywhere, wants to be involved in everything I do, and has figured out how to mimic human expressions of affection. Indeed, Pip had developed a habit of gently touching humans with its tiny claws in what was clearly an attempt at petting, the same way humans might pet a beloved animal. The gesture was so genuinely affectionate that even the most nervous staff members found themselves relaxing around the little creature. The bonding behavior is remarkable, Dr. Walsh continued. Pip seems to understand that humans respond positively to gentle touch and has adjusted its natural behaviors accordingly. Yesterday I was feeling frustrated with some test results and Pip actually brought me one of its toys. A comfort gesture. Sarah was documenting everything, knowing that these observations would reshape galactic understanding of Karathi development. But beyond the scientific implications, she was experiencing something much more personal. She was growing genuinely fond of these 3 alien children. Each evening after the day's activities wound down, the 3 young Karathi would gather in the common area with whatever humans were available. They had developed a routine of sharing the day's discoveries and experiences. Zeph would excitedly demonstrate some new scientific principle it had learned. Nova would challenge anyone willing to a game of chess or puzzles. Pip would simply curl up close to whoever seemed most receptive to cuddles. You know what's remarkable? Dr. Walsh observed on the seventh evening as Pip dozed against her leg while Nova and Zeph engaged in an animated discussion about quantum mechanics with Dr. Martinez. A week ago, these were alien monsters we were afraid to be in the same room with. Now they feel like family. Sarah nodded, watching Zeph attempt to explain its theory about interdimensional plant growth to an increasingly fascinated Dr. Martinez. The question is, what happens when Vorthak returns for his first scheduled visit tomorrow? How do we explain to the most feared predator in the galaxy that we've essentially adopted its children? As if summoned by her words, the communication system crackled to life. Vorthak's distinctive voice filled the room, causing all three young Karathi to look up with immediate excitement. Human friends. The great predator's voice was warm with what sounded like genuine affection. I have been monitoring your facility from a respectful distance. I request permission to visit my young tomorrow. I am curious to observe their progress. Zeph, Nova, and Pip were already chittering excitedly among themselves, and Sarah realized that despite their obvious happiness with the humans, they had missed their parent enormously. Permission granted, Vorthak, Sarah replied. I think you're going to be very proud of how much they've learned. What she didn't say, but what she was beginning to suspect, was that the learning had gone in both directions. The humans weren't just teaching the young Karathi about diversity and compassion. The young Karathi were teaching the humans about the true nature of their species, the potential for intelligence and gentleness that lay buried beneath generations of conquest and isolation. Tomorrow's visit would be the first real test of whether that mutual education could bridge the gap between two species that should have been natural enemies. Vorthak's arrival the next morning was markedly different from his first visit, where before the massive predator had moved with the careful control of a being trying not to appear threatening. Now there was an unmistakable eagerness in his approach. The great ship landed with practiced precision, and Vorthak emerged with something that could only be described as parental anticipation. The three young Karathi had been practically vibrating with excitement since dawn. They had spent the early morning hours preparing what they proudly called show and tell presentations for their parent, carefully selecting their favorite discoveries from the past week. Sarah watched from the observation deck as the family reunion unfolded below. Zeph, Nova, and Pip rushed to greet Vorthak with delighted chittering, their scales bright with joy. The massive predator lowered its great head to nuzzle each child gently, a gesture so tender it brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Human Dr. Sarah Chen. Vorthak's voice carried clearly through the communication system. I request permission to observe my young in their learning environment. Of course, Sarah replied. Would you like to visit their living areas, or would you prefer a formal presentation? Whatever would please the young ones most. The answer came immediately from three excited young voices. Show Vorthak everything. What followed was perhaps the most surreal guided tour in the history of interspecies relations. Zeph led the group to the xenobotany lab, where it had become Dr. Martinez's unofficial research partner. The young Karathi demonstrated its ability to trigger color changes in 17 different plant species, explained the chemical analysis techniques it had learned, and proudly displayed a small garden it had cultivated using principles it had discovered through experimentation. Observe, Vorthak, Zeph said with unmistakable pride. Plants respond to different chemical signatures. Humans use machines to detect this, but we can sense it naturally. By combining human technology with Karathi senses, research goes much faster. Vorthak examined his child's work with the intensity of a professional scientist. This hybridization of methodologies is highly innovative. You have created something neither species could achieve alone. Sarah felt a thrill of pride that surprised her with its intensity. She was proud of Zeph's accomplishments as if the young Karathi truly were her own child. Nova's presentation took place in the game room, where the young strategist had graduated from chess to three-dimensional tactical simulations. But Nova's real innovation wasn't in playing the games, but in creating new ones. Watch, Nova announced, activating a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a complex spatial puzzle. This is game I made. Rules are, protect all pieces, find solution that helps everyone, no one loses. Vorthak studied the display with growing amazement. This is a non-zero-sum strategy game. All participants can achieve victory simultaneously? Yes, Nova's excitement was infectious. Humans taught me that not all conflicts require losers. Some problems can be solved so everyone benefits. I made game to practice this kind of thinking. Remarkable, Vorthak murmured. In 300 years of Karathi civilization, no one has ever conceived of strategic thinking divorced from dominance hierarchies. Pip's presentation was simpler, but no less profound. The youngest had learned to weave, a skill taught by Dr. Walsh during quiet evening hours. Pip had created a small tapestry that depicted all the beings it had encountered on the station. Humans, Karathi, and even the small native creatures that occasionally wandered into the facility. Made picture cloth, Pip explained proudly. Shows all friends together. Different, but same happiness. Vorthak stared at the tapestry for a long moment, and Sarah realized that the great predator was seeing something that might not have existed in Karathi culture before. Art created purely for the joy of creation, depicting harmony rather than conquest. My young ones, Vorthak said slowly, you have learned things here that I did not expect, things I did not even know existed. The tour continued through the afternoon, with the young Karathi eagerly showing off everything from their understanding of human humor to their attempts at cooking human food. But the most significant moment came during the evening meal, when the entire research staff gathered in the common area for their daily communal dinner. Vorthak had been invited to join, and the massive predator sat somewhat awkwardly among the humans, trying to fit his enormous frame into a space designed for smaller beings. The young Karathi, however, had no such difficulties, moving seamlessly between their parent and their human caretakers. Tell Vorthak about the music, Dr. Walsh suggested as dessert was served. Nova perked up immediately. Oh yes. Humans make organized sound for pleasure. Watch. The young Karathi began tapping out a rhythm on the table, which Zeph joined with a melodic whistling sound, while Pip added harmony with soft chirps. The resulting music was unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy, a completely new form of artistic expression, created by the fusion of human concepts and Karathi natural abilities. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, complex in ways that purely human music could never achieve, yet unmistakably joyful in the way that marked all human creative endeavors. Vorthak listened in stunned silence. When the song ended, the great predator made a sound that the translation matrix struggled to interpret, finally settling on something between awe and grief. What troubles you? Sarah asked gently. I am realizing, Vorthak said slowly, how much my species has lost in our pursuit of dominance. We conquered 17 star systems, but in doing so, we destroyed the very diversity that could have taught us to create beauty like this. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. But that's why this program is so important. Your young ones are learning to see diversity as a resource rather than a threat. They could be the first generation of Karathi to build rather than destroy. More than that, Sarah added. They could be the generation that teaches other Karathi how to build, how to find strength in cooperation rather than conquest. Vorthak considered this carefully. You believe that 3 children could change an entire species? I believe, Sarah said, that 3 children who grow up knowing there are better ways to live will find ways to share that knowledge, and that other Karathi parents, faced with the same developmental crisis you're facing, will be willing to listen. The massive predator looked around the table at the humans who had welcomed not just his children, but him as well, despite everything his species represented. Dr. Sarah Chen, what you have given my young cannot be measured in any currency we understand. How do we repay such a gift? Sarah smiled. By letting them continue to learn, by being open to what they have to teach you when they return home, and maybe, if this works, by helping other Karathi parents understand that there are alternatives to conquest. And, added Dr. Walsh with a grin, by visiting regularly. These 3 miss you terribly between visits, and honestly, I think the whole team has grown attached to the entire family. Vorthak's laugh growl rumbled through the room, causing the human children to giggle and the young Karathi to purr with happiness. Dr. Walsh, I believe the attachment is mutual. My young speak of their human pack with the same devotion they show for their birth family. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself standing once again on the observation deck, but this time she was not alone. Vorthak had joined her, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. A month ago, Sarah mused, if someone had told me I'd be sharing a quiet evening with the most feared predator in the galaxy, discussing the finer points of child development, I would have questioned their sanity. A month ago, Vorthak replied. If someone had told me I would trust my most precious possessions to members of an alien species, I would have considered it an act of war. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the window as the three young Karathi played an elaborate game that seemed to involve elements of tag, hide-and-seek, and physics experimentation. Vorthak, Sarah said eventually, what you said about your species losing its way, it doesn't have to be permanent. Change is possible. Growth is possible. Your children are proof of that. The great predator's golden eyes reflected the starlight streaming through the observation deck windows. Dr. Sarah Chen, I am beginning to believe that my species' future may depend not on our strength, but on our willingness to learn from yours. And that is a lesson I never expected to encounter. Down below, Pip had discovered that certain metals in the station's construction could be made to sing when touched in specific patterns. Soon all three young Karathi were creating another impromptu concert, their music drifting up through the facility's ventilation system like a promise of harmony between species that had never known peace. Sarah smiled, realizing that they had already succeeded far beyond their original goals. They weren't just helping three young Karathi develop properly. They were midwifing the birth of something entirely new in galactic civilization. 3 months into the program, everything changed. The morning started normally enough. Zeph was assisting Dr. Martinez with cross-species botanical analysis. Nova was engaged in a complex strategic simulation with Chief Thompson, and Pip was helping Dr. Walsh organize medical supplies with the meticulous attention to detail that had made the youngest Karathi indispensable to the medical bays. Efficiency. Then the alarms began. Dr. Chen, we have multiple ships approaching the station, came the urgent voice of Lieutenant Parker from the communications center. 3 hegemony destroyers, 2 council investigation vessels, and, oh no, Dr. Chen, we have a Karathi battle group on approach vector. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had known this moment might come, but she had hoped for more time. The galactic political situation had been growing increasingly tense as word of the Human Karathi Cooperation Program spread throughout known space. How long until they arrive? She asked, already moving toward the command center. 90 minutes for the fastest ships, maybe 2 hours for the full fleet. Sarah activated the general communication system. All personnel, this is Dr. Chen. We have incoming vessels from multiple governments. This is not a drill. Emergency Protocol 7 is now in effect. Emergency Protocol 7 meant one thing, potential evacuation of the young Karathi. Sarah had hoped they would never need to use it. Within minutes, the 3 young ones had been gathered in the secure conference room, their usual playful demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Zeph's scales had darkened to a worried gray-green. Nova paced nervously around the room, and Pip had retreated into Dr. Walsh's arms for comfort. What's happening? Zeph asked, its young voice tight with concern. Are the ships here to hurt humans? Sarah knelt down to the young Karathi's eye level. We don't know yet. But some governments are worried about humans and Karathi working together. They think it might be dangerous, but we're not dangerous, Nova protested. We help with research. We play games. We make music. I know, sweetheart, Sarah said, the endearment coming naturally after months of caring for them. But some beings are afraid of what they don't understand. The communication system crackled to life with Vorthak's distinctive voice, though this time it carried an edge of steel that reminded everyone exactly what he was capable of becoming. Human Research Station, this is Vorthak. I am detecting multiple armed vessels approaching your location. Are my young in danger? Sarah activated the external speakers. Vorthak, we don't know yet. The fleet includes representatives from several governments. They may be here to investigate our program, but we won't know their intentions until they arrive. I am moving to a defensive position, Vorthak replied. If any vessel takes aggressive action toward the station or my young, I will respond appropriately. Sarah felt a chill. If Vorthak decided that his children were threatened, he was fully capable of destroying every ship in the approaching fleet. The political ramifications would be catastrophic. Vorthak, please, we need to give diplomacy a chance. Let them speak first, a pause. Then very well. But I will not allow harm to come to my young or their human caretakers. 30 minutes later, the first ship arrived. To Sarah's relief, it was not one of the military vessels, but rather a smaller diplomatic craft bearing the markings of the Galactic Council's mediation service. Ambassador Krell, a tall crystalline being from the Silicate Federation. materialized in the conference room via hologram. Her multifaceted face made it difficult to read her expression, but her tone was carefully neutral. Dr. Chen, I am here to conduct an emergency evaluation of this facility and its unusual program. The Council has received numerous complaints alleging that humans are violating the Apex Species Protection Protocols by maintaining unauthorized contact with Karathi juveniles. Ambassador Krell, Sarah replied formally. Our program was approved through proper channels and has been continuously monitored for safety compliance. All of our activities are thoroughly documented and available for review. Nevertheless, the situation requires immediate assessment. I will need to interview your staff and observe the subjects directly. Sarah bristled at the word subjects. Ambassador, with respect, these are children, not experimental subjects. They have names, personalities, and emotional needs that must be considered in any evaluation process. The ambassador's crystalline features shifted in what might have been surprise. Dr. Chen, surely you understand that emotional attachment to apex species juveniles represents a significant psychological hazard. Such attachments compromise scientific objectivity and could lead to dangerous judgment errors. Before Sarah could respond, Zeph spoke up from where it sat near the conference table. Ambassador Krell, may I ask a question? The holographic ambassador turned toward the young Karathi with obvious discomfort. This is highly irregular. Apex species juveniles are not typically consulted in administrative proceedings. But I am here and I can speak for myself, Zeph replied with quiet dignity. What psychological hazard do you believe my presence creates? Ambassador Krell seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. Well, the documented behavioral patterns of your species indicate extreme aggression, territorial dominance, and predatory instincts that could manifest without warning. Nova joined the conversation from its position near the strategic display. Ambassador, in the 3 months we have been here, have you received any reports of aggressive behavior from any of us? That is not the point. The potential for dangerous behavior is based on observations of adult Karathi who developed in isolation. Pip interrupted softly from Dr. Walsh's arms. We are developing differently because we are learning from humans who show us better ways to be. Sarah watched in amazement as the 3 young Karathi tag-teamed the ambassador with logic and evidence, presenting their case with more eloquence than many trained diplomats. Furthermore, Zeph continued, if emotional attachment to us represents a psychological hazard to humans, what does that suggest about the nature of the emotions we inspire? Are humans becoming more aggressive and territorial through association with us? Or are they becoming more nurturing and protective? Ambassador Krell was clearly struggling with the implications of the question. That is not. The established protocols are designed to prevent. To prevent what? Nova pressed gently. To prevent cooperation? To prevent learning? To prevent peace? The ambassador's hologram flickered as she apparently consulted with her superiors. Dr. Chen, I will need to observe these juveniles in their daily activities before making any recommendations to the council. Of course, Sarah agreed. But Ambassador, I need you to understand something. These children have been living here for 3 months. This is their home. If your evaluation determines that they need to be removed, it will be traumatic for them and for the humans who care for them. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Krell replied stiffly. Personal attachments cannot be allowed to override safety protocols. It was Dr. Walsh who spoke up next, her voice calm but firm. Ambassador, with respect, if safety protocols require us to abandon children who need our help, then perhaps the protocols need to be reevaluated. The conversation was interrupted by another communication alert. The military vessels had arrived and they were requesting immediate permission to board the station. Negative, Sarah responded quickly. This is a civilian research facility with children aboard. Any inspection must be conducted through proper diplomatic channels with appropriate safeguards for the welfare of all residents. The response came from Admiral Thorne of the Hegemony Fleet, his voice sharp with authority. Dr. Chen, this facility is harboring apex predators in violation of galactic security regulations. We have authorization to conduct an immediate inspection and, if necessary, to neutralize any threats to regional stability. Sarah felt the room temperature drop several degrees. Admiral, if you're suggesting that 3 children represent a threat to regional stability, I would question the stability of your threat assessment protocols. Dr. Chen, Admiral Thorne's voice carried unmistakable menace. You will prepare the apex specimens for immediate transfer to secure containment facilities. This is not a request. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear her heart pounding. Then, very quietly, Pip spoke up. Dr. Walsh, are the bad ships going to take us away from you? Dr. Walsh's arms tightened protectively around the smallest Karathi. Not if I have anything to say about it, sweetheart. Sarah realized that they had reached the moment of truth. Everything they had worked for, everything they had learned about cooperation and understanding between species, was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the deep rumble of Vorthok's ship moving into a position that could only be described as defensive. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of 3 young Karathi, but potentially the future of interspecies relations in the galaxy. The standoff lasted 47 minutes. Sarah spent those minutes in the most intense diplomatic negotiations of her life, with Ambassador Krell serving as mediator between increasingly hostile military forces and a research station that had suddenly become the most politically significant location in known space. Admiral Thorne's ships maintained attack position, while demanding immediate surrender of the apex specimens. The Karathi battle group, led by Vorthok, had positioned themselves to protect the station, but had not yet made any overtly threatening moves. The Galactic Council vessels hung back, presumably documenting everything for later analysis. Through it all, Zeph, Nova, and Pip remained in the conference room with the human staff, their behavior serving as the most powerful argument for the success of the program. While military commanders debated their fate in increasingly heated exchanges, the 3 young Karathi worked quietly on a puzzle that Nova had designed, occasionally offering comfort to nervous humans or asking thoughtful questions about the political situation. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Krell said during a brief lull in communications, I must ask, are you prepared to risk an interstellar incident to protect these juveniles? Sarah looked at Zeph, who was patiently explaining quantum mechanics to a terrified junior researcher at Nova, who had somehow turned the tense situation into an opportunity to teach strategic thinking to the security staff, and at Pip, who was offering silent comfort to anyone who seemed distressed. Ambassador, Sarah replied, I'm prepared to risk an interstellar incident to protect my family. The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. Family? Ambassador Krell's crystalline features shifted in obvious confusion. Dr. Chen, surely you realize these are not your genetic offspring. They belong to an entirely different species with completely different evolutionary imperatives. It was Pip who answered, speaking softly but clearly, from Dr. Walsh's lap. Ambassador Krell, do you have family? Yes, of course. The Silicate Federation maintains strong family pod structures. Are all members of your family pod the same age? Pip continued. No, but I fail to see the relevance. Same profession? Not necessarily in same interests? Same abilities? Same appearance? Ambassador Krell was quiet for a moment. No, but they are all Silicate Federation citizens with shared genetic heritage. Nova looked up from its puzzle. So family for you is defined by genetic similarity and political affiliation? That is an oversimplification, but essentially accurate. Zeph joined the conversation without looking up from its work. For humans, family is defined by emotional attachment, mutual care, and shared experiences. Genetic similarity is considered helpful but not necessary. We share experiences with humans, Pip added. We care for each other. Dr. Walsh stays up when I have bad dreams. Dr. Martinez gets excited about my plant discoveries. Dr. Chen worries about our safety even when it puts her in danger. And we care for them too, Nova continued. When Dr. Thompson was sad about the death of his pet, I made him a game to help him feel better. When Dr. Martinez was stressed about his research deadline, Zeph helped him finish his work faster. Ambassador Krell's hologram flickered as she processed this exchange. You're suggesting that family bonds can form across species lines. We're not suggesting it, Sarah interjected. We're demonstrating it. Ambassador, these children have been living with us for 3 months. They're not specimens or security threats. They're individuals with personalities, preferences, talents, and emotional needs. They've become part of our community. The communication system crackled with Admiral Thorne's voice cutting through the conversation. Dr. Chen, I'm declaring this facility to be in violation of galactic security protocols. You have 60 seconds to surrender the apex specimens or we will board by force. Sarah felt her heart stop. Admiral, there are children here. If you board this station with hostile intent, you'll be putting innocent lives at risk. The only innocents here are your staff members, who will be evacuated before we neutralize the apex threats. The words hit the conference room like a physical blow. The three young Karathi looked at each other with obvious fear, while the human staff moved instinctively to protective positions around them. Admiral Thorne, came Vorthak's voice over the communications channel, carrying a tone of cold fury that sent chills down Sarah's spine. If you attempt to board that station with hostile intent, I will consider it an act of war against my offspring. Vorthak, you're outnumbered 3-1. Stand down immediately or face the consequences. There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Then Vorthak spoke again, but this time his voice carried something Sarah had never heard before. Hope. Admiral Thorne, before you take any irreversible action, I invite you to observe something. On the main display screen, an image appeared showing the station's main laboratory. Zeph was standing at a workstation, carefully manipulating some kind of chemical apparatus while Dr. Martinez looked on with obvious pride. This is my eldest child, Zeph, Vorthak's voice continued. 3 months ago, Zeph's greatest achievement was successfully stalking a mechanical training target. Today, Zeph has contributed to 4 peer-reviewed research papers and discovered 2 new chemical compounds with potential medical applications. The image shifted to show Nova in the strategy room, but instead of playing games, the young Karathi was working with Chief Thompson to redesign the station's defensive systems. My second child, Nova, once showed promise only in tactics of destruction. Today, Nova has designed defensive strategies that protect without causing harm, and has created games that teach cooperation instead of domination. Finally, the image showed Pip in the medical bay, carefully organizing supplies while Dr. Walsh worked on a patient. My youngest, Pip, was developing into a creature that knew only how to take from others. Today, Pip spends every day finding ways to help and comfort beings of a completely different species. Vorthak paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of a species transformation. Admiral Thorne, Ambassador Krell, honored representatives of the Galactic Council, behold the first generation of Karathi to learn that strength can be used to protect rather than destroy, that intelligence can be applied to creation rather than conquest, that the greatest victory is achieved when all participants benefit. The silence that followed was profound. Ambassador Krell was the first to speak. The behavioral modifications are remarkable, but surely this represents an isolated case. 3 individuals cannot transform an entire species. You are correct, Vorthak agreed. 3 individuals cannot. But 3 individuals can teach others, and others can teach still more. Ambassador, I formally request that the Galactic Council consider expanding this program. Sarah's head shot up. Expanding it? Dr. Sarah Chen, Vorthak's voice was warm with affection. My species faces a crisis that threatens our very survival. Not from external enemies, but from the emptiness we have created within ourselves. You have shown us a path back to wholeness. I am prepared to bring other Karathi young to learn from human caretakers if you are willing to accept them. The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Vorthak, you're talking about fundamentally changing Karathi civilization. I am talking about saving it, he replied, and in the process perhaps showing the galaxy that cooperation is stronger than conquest. Admiral Thorne's voice cut through the moment. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the security implications. Apex predators cannot be allowed to... Admiral, came a new voice over the communication channel. Sarah didn't recognize it, but the authority in the tone was unmistakable. This is Fleet Commander Zara of the Sol Defense Corps. You are ordered to stand down immediately. Fleet Commander, I don't recognize your authority in this matter. Then recognize this. You are surrounded by the 3rd Human Fleet, which arrived 30 minutes ago and has been monitoring this situation. Any hostile action against the research station will be considered an act of war against the Human Federation. Sarah looked out the observation window to see the space around the station filling with sleek human vessels. She hadn't even known they were coming. Furthermore, Fleet Commander Zara continued, the Human Federation officially recognizes Zeph, Nova, and Pip as residents of Federation space under the protection of Federation law. Any attempt to remove them against their will would constitute kidnapping. Ambassador Krell's hologram was flickering frantically as she consulted with her superiors. Fleet Commander Zara, Dr. Chen, the Galactic Council needs time to evaluate these unprecedented developments. I propose a formal hearing to review all evidence before any final decisions are made. Agreed, Sarah said quickly. But the hearing must include testimony from Zeph, Nova, and Pip. They're not objects to be decided about. They're individuals with the right to speak for themselves. For a moment, the future of galactic civilization hung in the balance of competing claims and jurisdictions. Then, unexpectedly, it was Pip who broke the deadlock. "Excuse me," the youngest Karathi said politely. "May I say something?" Every being in the communications network seemed to hold their breath. "I understand you are all worried about what might happen if Karathi and humans become friends. But look around. We are already friends. Zeph makes discoveries that help everyone. Nova creates solution.